Hello and welcome. My name is Amanda, and today I have for you my August reading wrap up. So, this whole month I participated in the N.E.W.T.s that was hosted by G over at Book Roast. And the last week of the month I also participated in the Discover New Worlds Readathon that was hosted by Paige over at Creating & Co. I do have a vlog for days 1 through I think 14, and then days 15 through 31 of the month, and I'll leave those linked down below if you care to check them out. But basically, I think the easiest way to go through this wrap up is to do course by course and tell you what I read, how long it was, my rating, and like a short review of it. So this is going to be alphabetically by course just because that's how I have it in my planner. So first course we come to is Ancient Runes. I read Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card for the acceptable prompt, which was Ewaz, which is a friend recommendation. This is recommended to me by my friend Sarah, and this is the second book in the Enders saga. And I gave it a, what did I get it? I'm going to be looking down a lot, looking at my notes and things, so that's why I'm not looking towards you. But this was a 14-hour and 10-minute audiobook. I gave a 3-star rating. It was overall pretty good, but it took me a while to get into it, and I never really had a desire to like pick it up and continue reading, even as an audiobook. We basically follow the events of Ender's Game 3,000 years in the future. So the events after the Bugger Wars and what happened at the end of Ender's Game. And we are introduced to new characters. It doesn't take place in a battle school anymore, but more colonizing the other planets of the galaxy, I guess you could say. So it took me a while to get into this, and overall it didn't click with me the same way the Ender's Game did, because I think I liked the school setting a lot more, and I liked the characters in Ender's Game a lot more than I did this. So it was alright, and I guess I'm glad to be continuing the story just to finally finish the saga. But so far I was a little disappointed in this, and I've started reading Xenocide, and it's got the same feelings as this one, so we'll see how it goes. The next prompt was the Exceeds Expectation prompt for Ancient Runes, which was a book written in the past tense. And I read Metaltown by Kristen Simmons. This was also for me for Discover New Worlds, a book that is written by a new-to-me author and a book that contains a journey. So I ended up listening to this on Scribd, and it was 13 hours and 36 minutes that I gave a 3-star rating. It was all right. So we, the chapters are split up, and we follow 3 different characters, Colin, Lena, and Ty. And it's basically like our world, but kind of a dystopian setting. And you've got this one man or this one family, the Hamptons, who kind of run the town, and they're very wealthy. And then everyone else is kind of just scraping by for money and a good way of living. A lot of the food is genetically modified at this point, and people, like prisoners, are made to be tasters, so that way they can know if the food that they're making is edible or not. So you've got Lena, who is a Hampton, and she just lives in this world where everything's perfect and fine. She has an abusive father and brother, but other than that, like, she lives a life of luxury. And then Colin and Ty are on the opposite end of that. So they are young kids working in a factory building the switches or the detonators for bombs, because the town basically is constantly building stuff for warfare. So the three come together, and there's a story that goes along, and it was all right, but overall just not like a great story to me, but it was good for what it was. So next subject we have is Care of Magical Creatures. And for that, I read 3 different books, one for each level of the N.E.W.T.s. So for Acceptable, which was a book starting with A for Aragog, I read Adrift by Tammy Oldham Ashcraft. And this is a autobiography, I think, about a time when she was in her early or late 20s, and she and her, at the time, fiance were commissioned to sail a luxury yacht from, I think it was Tahiti, to San Diego. And during that voyage, they got caught by a hurricane called Hurricane Raymond. And Richard ends up getting washed overboard, and it's basically a story of love, loss, and survival at sea. It's basically her finding the will to live, even though she's been banged up and she's lost the love of her life, and she is on this boat that's basically completely destroyed, and she has to use the backup in order to get herself to land safely. So it's kind of that story of her journey on this and what she goes through mentally and physically, to coming ashore in Hawaii, and the aftermath of that as well. So it was a decent book. Oh, I didn't say, this was 230 pages, and I gave it a 4-star rating. So I mostly picked this up because I wanted to watch the movie, but it is a book that I'm glad I know the story of now as well. For Exceeds Expectations in Care of Magical Creatures, the prompt was to read a book with fewer than 300 pages, and I read Vampire Knight Volume 1 by Matsuri Hino, and this was 192 pages, and I gave it a 3-star rating. You basically follow, Yuki, I think is her name. Yeah, Yuki, and Zero and Kaname. I think that's his name. But this is a manga that follows the 2 classes at the Cross Academy. You have the day class and the night class, and the night class is completely made up of vampires. So it's kind of Yuki and Zero, it's their job to be, what are they called? They're like the disciplinary committee, so they make sure that the day class doesn't cross the night class, because the day class is not aware that the night class is completely made up of vampires. So it's just kind of the little antics that go on at the school and things like that. The next book was for Outstanding, which was to read a book with a bird on the cover. And for that, I reread Fallen Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. You've got a falcon on the cover. I listened to books 1 through 4 maybe 2 years ago, and then I bought all of them right there in the physical form because I wanted to finish books 5 and 6, and I wanted to reread them as a physical form. So this was a Fallen Kingdoms. It was a 412-page book that I gave a 3-star rating, and overall I feel like my reread of it went pretty well. I remembered the big plot points, but I kind of had forgotten a bit of the stuff that went along with it. So it was nice to be able to reread this and just kind of be back in that world. I'm part of the Creating & Co. book club group on Facebook, and I know Paige, who is the owner of Creating & Co., she read all of these books last year, I want to say. She like completely binged the story, and the way she describes them is like a fantasy CW show, and upon reread, like, that's 100% correct. There's so much drama involved in this, and you know, all that other stuff. So it was pretty good. I'm excited to see how the story or the whole series ends, but it'll be a while before I get through it. So next course we have is Charms, and the first book was the first prompt was acceptable and to read a book with a gorgeous cover. And for that I read Spellslinger by Sebastian de Castell, and this was also the group read for the readathon, which worked as a kind of fundus charm, so you could fit it in anywhere, but I read it on my Kindle, and the Kindle cover is really beautiful, so it fit perfectly. But that was, for me, a 432 page ebook that I gave a 3-star rating. So I would have rated this a lot higher, but one of my, I guess you could call it, triggers for books is animal abuse, animal cruelty, animal harm, all of that. And this book had a couple different instances of that within it. So it just kind of colored my perception of the book as a whole. But basically we're following 15, almost 16-year-old Kellen, who is a mage, and his powers are slowly going away. He's never had them fully. He's been able to do a little bit of magic, but not 100%. So this woman comes into town named Farius, and kind of shakes things up a little bit, and we find out what's kind of going on within the town, and the stakes and things that are at play. So it's a pretty interesting book. You've got kind of like I wouldn't call it a familiar, but you do have a squirrel cat who's got quite the attitude and just a good companion. Definitely wouldn't want to be on his bad side. And you've got family dynamics that may not be entirely what they seem, and all sorts of things like that. So it was pretty decent. I am planning at this point to continue on with the series. I believe the next book is called Shadow Black, but I do already own it on my Kindle, but we'll kind of wait to see how I feel at the end of that book before I decide to continue on with the rest of the series. So I'm not sure yet. The next prompt for Charms was Exceeds Expectations, and that was either a comic book, a manga, or a graphic novel. And for that I picked up another manga, which was Vampire Knight Volume 2. And this one just continues on the events of Vampire Knight Volume 1. I guess I'll talk about both of these at the same time. For the outstanding prompt, it was Spongify or to read a paperback. So I read Vampire Knight Volume 3 as well. So Volume 2 was 186 pages and Volume 3 was 196, and I gave both of these 3-star rating. And I didn't like Volume 2 as much as I liked Volumes 1 and 3. I felt like this kind of had like middle book syndrome, even though there's 19 mangas in this series. But you find out more about kind of the backgrounds of our main characters within Volumes 2 and Volume 3, and then there's a new thing that's brought into play in Volume 3. I read this on a car ride, and this one took me a couple days, which I don't know why, but overall it's been a fun manga to kind of binge read, and they go really fast, which is nice. So for Defense Against the Dark Arts, the first prompt was for acceptable, and that was to read a book with a black cover underneath the dust jacket. And I think I only had 2 books with a black cover underneath the dust jacket. Most of my books are paperback, or if they are hardback, I've read them. So I read Beneath the Sugar Sky by Seanan McGuire, and this is the third book in the Wayward Children series. This book is, how many pages? Not going in order, I'm losing my place on the one page I'm looking at. So it's 174 pages, and I gave this one a 4-star rating. We are back more at the school for Wayward Children. Eleanor West, isn't that what it's called? Eleanor West Home for Wayward Children? I think that's what it's called, her school. Something like that. And I liked this a lot more than the first book, and a lot more than the second book, which I found kind of interesting. But I liked being back with the characters we knew and were introduced to with the first book. But also, we got to travel to different worlds within this one, which was really fun. So it's kind of nice to be able to understand a bit more of the logic and nonsense worlds and the difference between them and things like that. So I thought it was fun to read that. I do have In an Absent Dream, but I don't know when I'll get to it, which is completely unrelated to what we're talking about right now. So for Exceeds Expectations for Defense Against the Dark Arts, the next book was Gilderoy's Memory Charm, and this was the first book that came to your mind from your TBR. So I read The Painted Girls by Kathy Marie Buchanan. I picked this up in like the bargain section of Barnes & Noble a couple years ago and hadn't gotten around to it. And it's kind of like I was deciding that next year I might do a like 12 books on the chopping block, or if I don't read these in the next 12 months, they're out of here sort of thing. But I was able to get this on audiobook, I think through my library. So it was 12 hours and 16 minutes, and I gave it a 3-star rating. I kind of wish I had known this was a fictionalized story of the two main characters' lives before going into it, because there were quite a few points when I thought they were just petulant little girls. But basically it takes place in Paris in 1878, and it's surrounding the lives of the Van Gotham sisters. Their father passes away kind of suddenly and unexpectedly, and they are all then kind of expected to contribute to the household because their mother, she is a laundress, but she really likes absinthe, so a lot of their extra money goes towards that. So the oldest sister is Antoinette, I think. Yeah. And she was going to be a dancer at the ballet school or the Paris Opera, but she had a bit of an attitude, so now she kind of goes from job to job. And then Charlotte and Marie, Marie's the older, she's the middle sister, end up going to the ballet school, and Marie kind of gets picked to model for this artist, and has to do things that she's not entirely comfortable with, but they need the money. So it just kind of follows their lives as Antoinette kind of gets brought into the wrong crowd, and Marie kind of learns that life isn't as flowery and fluffy as she has kind of been coddled to think it is. So I thought it was pretty good for what it was, but I do wish I had remembered or known or whatever it was that this was a fictionalized story of two real people's lives, because then I think I would have read it a little differently. For Herbology, I read an audiobook for The Acceptable Prompt, which I read Mystic by Jason Denzel, and this was a 9-hour and 23-minute audiobook. I gave a 2-star rating. It's the first book in a series, and I'm not continuing on with it. I thought the main character was incredibly annoying. Basically, you've got the royals of the land who can harness the power of the mist, but the kind of common people aren't allowed to or supposed to. And you've got the main girl whose name I can't even remember right now, who is chosen by the High Mystic to go compete for like the next apprenticeship spot in the Mystic apprenticeship. I don't even remember what it is. She was just really obnoxious, really dumb, just not a good like main character. And I thought the plot had a lot of potential, but it just kind of, I feel like, went way downhill. I felt like at the beginning the author did a good job of building the world, and then it just kind of all went away. Like, I really liked the beginning of the book, and then the middle and the end were just no good. So I don't want to continue with it. But there's that. And then for Exceeds Expectations for Herbology, the prompt was to read a book between 350 and 390 pages. And I own a physical copy of Atonement by Ian McEwan, which is 351 pages for this copy. But I did listen to it on audiobook. It was either through Scribd or through my library. And it was a 14-hour, 15-minute audiobook that I gave a... Where am I? I gave this a 4-star rating. I really enjoyed this. So you follow Bryony, who's a 13-year-old girl, and she witnesses what she thinks is her sister being taken advantage of by a local boy that they kind of grew up with, who's best friends with their older brother and has been around the family for a long time. He's kind of sponsored by their father in order to pursue his degree and things like that. What she doesn't know is that basically her sister and this boy are just trying not to get caught. So he's falsely accused of rape, and the sister, what is her name? Cecilia. She and Robbie, who's the boy, end up getting separated for quite some time. He goes to prison, and then he enlists in the army. So this takes place in kind of the summer days before World War II starts, also during World War II, and then after World War II. So that's kind of what it's about. I picked this up because I've wanted to watch the movie for quite some time. I know it's got Keira Knightley and Saoirse Ronan in it, and I think this was a book that someone in my senior year AP English class read multiple times, and so it's a book that I've thought about for quite some time, just hadn't picked up, but I found a good condition used copy at my local used bookstore and picked it up, and I'm glad that I was able to read it this past month. I then went into Muggle Studies and read a book partially for the acceptable prompt, which is to read a book with a photo on the cover, or photo element on the cover. And I read about half, I think, of Soulless by Gail Carriger. This was the group read book for the Discover New Worlds Readathon, and I read it on my Kindle. It was 404 pages total, I think, and I read 194 pages. I did finish it within the first couple days of September, so I'm just going to include it in this wrap-up. That way I don't forget about it. But I think I gave it a 3-star rating. So I had listened to all of the books in the Finishing School series by Gail Carriger, and they follow Sophronia, I think was her name, who was like a 14 or 15-year-old girl who kind of doesn't quite fit into her family, and she ends up getting selected to go to this special finishing school that actually teaches the girls about being spies. And it's a steampunk inspired world that they live in, and that this novel is set around. The school takes place in a dirigible, and there's like clockwork staff and things like that, and there's vampires and werewolves and all sorts of things. So Soulless, the Parasol Protectorate series, I believe is the name of it. Takes place 25 years after the events of finishing school. And we follow, oh my gosh, what is her name? I just read this book. I don't remember her name. But basically, she is this thing called a preternatural. Is that what it is? Or she basically is like the antidote, I guess, towards like vampirism and werewolves and stuff. So like if she touches a vampire, his teeth will retract, and if she touches a werewolf, he won't be a werewolf anymore, sort of thing. So it's kind of more of an adult novel. So you've got a heavy romance that's a little steamy at times, and we're also reintroduced to characters that were in the finishing school series. So I thought it was all right for what it was. There were times when it was a little heavy on the intimate scenes, and it's kind of like, okay, where's like the rest of the plot in this story? But other than that, it was fun being back in that world and just kind of experiencing that again. So I am going to continue on with the series. I think the next book is called Changeless, but I don't own it yet. Maybe I'll switch back to the audiobook because I did enjoy that for the finishing school series, but actually I don't know if my library has it, so we'll see where I can pick it up, but we'll see if I finish it. So next subject was Transfiguration, and I'm just going to go over these next two books together because they were the end of a series. So the acceptable prompt was to read a book with LGBTQIA plus rep in it, and the exceeds expectation book or prompt was to read a book that's not the first in the series. So I read Clockwork Prince and Clockwork Princess by Cassandra Clare. Clockwork Prince was 15 hours 34 minutes. I gave it a 3-star rating, and Clockwork Princess was 16 hours 19 minutes that I gave a 3-star rating. I think I listened to both of these through my library. I read the first book, City of Bones, physically, and the rest I've listened to via audiobook, and I'm doing a buddy read for the Shadowhunter series with my friend Darshell over at Books and Planners, and we were able to squeeze in 2 of the Shadowhunters books this month, which was pretty cool. And Clockwork Princess worked for Set in a Different Time and a foiled cover for the Discover New Worlds Readathon. So I think I liked Clockwork Princess more than Clockwork Prince, and I definitely feel confident on this point in saying that I like the Infernal Devices more than the Mortal Instruments. But basically we continue on with the events after Clockwork Angel. So following learning more about the Clockwork people he has. Are they called automatons? I think so. And also feeding more into the love triangle that has blossomed, which I definitely prefer over the love thing that's in the Mortal Instruments. But what I found was I never really grew to like Tessa as a character. I just really liked Jem and Will, and kind of learning a lot more of the background of the Shadowhunters, and a little bit more about the runes and the things like that, and also just having that background knowledge to be able to connect it back to the events and people that we meet in the Mortal Instruments has been really cool. So overall, I read a total of 14 books for the month, which brought my page count up to 2,016 pages, and my total time, which I'm a little surprised wasn't higher, but it was 95 hours and 33 minutes. And then overall, I had an average rating of 3.1 stars, which isn't too bad, and not shocking at all considering I gave most of these book 3-star ratings. So I would really love to know if you participated in the N.E.W.T.s year 2, and if so, what career were you pursuing? I was personally pursuing a magizoologist career, and I did complete all the props necessary so I can go find Newt Scamander and go study under him, even though we're, almost 100 years apart from each other. But anyway, I really enjoyed a lot of the books that I read this month, and I would love to know what you read and maybe what your favorite read was. Again, what career you sat for the N.E.W.T.s, if you did sit one, and if you accomplished your goal. So please do chat with me down in the comments below, and I will see you there until my next video. Bye!